Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, January 28th, 2019. Time for yet another show. Time for yet another week. I forget what week we are in. I think we're in about week 105, 106 of The Presidential Apprentice. I'll have to check that. Maybe we'll bring you up to speed once we reach week 110. Nice round number. But it was an interesting week. Last week. We're back. We're here. We have the country still, more or less intact. I really thought that there were 2 points, during the last week at which I thought, this could really kind of be the end for America. And both of them defused, thankfully. Of course, both of them inflicted on us at the hands of the tiny, short-fingered, stubby-fingered hands of Donald Trump. The first one was when midweek, remember, this is how long that week was. Middle of the week, we were treated to the spectacle of newspaper folks having to speculate who would win in a gun battle between the, at that point, unpaid Secret Service and the fully paid and appropriated for Capitol Police staff. I don't know wasn't sure where to put the odds on that one. They're both pretty well trained. Secret Service, of course, you get the idea that they have elite training, and I suppose that they do. There are more Capitol Police, I think, typically, although the Secret Service can bring a pretty significant force along with it. But then I thought, well, maybe because they're not getting paid, they'll be less enthused, perhaps, about doing their jobs. I think they're less enthused. I don't think they'd be any less effective. Then I thought maybe they'll be hungrier for it, too. I mean, you never know. Maybe the Capitol Police have grown complacent on their wages being paid. Couldn't be sure. But, of course, the more important battle that would be taking place there would be the question of, essentially, it was, what do we do if Donald Trump actually insists on trying to burst into the House chamber and deliver a State of the Union address, despite the fact that no joint session has been called and Nancy Pelosi doesn't have any intention of calling one and hasn't invited him to speak in the House chamber. And we were forced to sort of examine, as we frequently are in the Trump era and, other times, not quite to this extreme, but ask, well, what happens if? No one's ever done it, but what happens if? And the answer, again, being, well, he can't, and in air quotes, he can't simply walk into the House chamber. Well, suppose he does, what do you do? Now, normally a person would step in front of you and say, I'm sorry, sir, this is off limits to you. To me, that works. To the President of the United States, whoever he may be, it might not. To Donald Trump, it absolutely does. Are you kidding? I own this. No, this isn't your golden bathroom. You can't come in. I own everything. Nobody can get in my way. And, of course, he thinks being president is just like being dictator. I have guys with guns with me. We have guys with guns with us, but they're not usually standing here necessarily, not all of them. So, so some question about what do you do if he just tries to walk in anyway? I mean, do you block his way? Do you detain him? Would the Secret Service feel any compulsion to push past? I mean, they aren't really authorized to go where they wanted to go. I'd be curious to know what they'd instruct their officers to do. I assume it would be like if the president just tries to walk in there, hang back. There's very little danger of him being shot by the Capitol Police. But Trump, I presumably would know that too. And I wonder what he would, I don't know. I don't know how crazy he really is. I guess maybe as a younger man, even, he might have been more apt to try to push his way past a cop. I don't know. I mean, he must know. He must have known, if he thought about it at all, that, no Capitol policeman is going to shoot the president. Of course, if the audience isn't there, why would he bother? I mean, I think that was the bottom line of it, is there's no way he would bother. He wouldn't get out of bed unless he thought there was an audience waiting for him. So if he knew that the audience wasn't there, I don't know how enthusiastic he would be about trying to push his way in there and somehow, be filmed on somebody's iPhone camera trying to give a speech and having people pull him away from the podium. I also don't think it would make him look particularly good. He's large and out of shape, an older guy, and he would be hauled out of there, I assume, pretty unceremoniously if they couldn't get him to turn around and walk out of there. Carrying him out of there would be no small task. That's true. I was curious, and with an idiot like Trump, you really had to wonder, was anybody advising him, don't worry about it, they won't touch you, or you're entitled to this, or it's going to go this way or that way. Anyway, that got diffused midweek when Trump said, it's Nancy's prerogative. That was supposed to be a derogatory nickname for her. Nancy. It's her prerogative, which is a new word for him, to delay the speech. And so she did, and that was it. I was surprised by the way that one came out. And I guess then we shouldn't have been surprised by the way the other crisis over the shutdown came out. He basically did the same thing. It's Nancy's prerogative to do this, and I give up. Only temporarily. And the political situation is such that, of course, we may be shut down once again over exactly the same thing in 3 weeks because they didn't do anything. They just agreed to open the government while they talked about what to do next. And, of course, the Trump position will be, I insist on wall funding. I think he's just going to continue to do that. He might get talked out of it. Somebody might have figured out that it's a disaster for him and he should back off. But all indications are that he's going to spend the 3 weeks insisting on the wall. And I guess there's still the possibility that he thinks he'll declare the emergency at the end of the 3 weeks and we'll bypass it that way. Remember, we go back to this is probably plan C or D, somewhere along the line, where he would declare an emergency, try to do whatever the hell it is he wanted to do with the wall, get tied up in court, and then say, well, we'll let the courts figure it out, but I think I'm going to win, and so let's let the government funding go forward, and I will fight and win in the courts, and then he'd fight and lose in the courts, and then he'd say, dang it, and by that time it would be almost appropriations time again, and he could shut down the government again the second year in a row, and or maybe this would be the third year in a row. I can't remember anymore. So I guess that's still the most likely thing out there, but what a week to twice in a single week think, I don't know if we're going to get out of this one. The situation that really made it dicey about the shutdown, of course, was some excitement even during the show on Friday as airports began to shut down. We had seen TSA inspection stations closed down already for the past 2 weeks or so, or some of the no airport was going without security, obviously, but certain of the 2 out of 3 terminals were operating, or maybe 1 out of 3 in some cases. And then by Friday morning, when LaGuardia Airport shut down because the air traffic controllers couldn't get enough staffers up there in the tower, and other air traffic control stations around the country began experiencing similar problems. And of course, you close one airport like LaGuardia and it has ripple effects all over the country. But by the end of the show, Philadelphia and Newark airports were reporting that they were taking fewer flights. And then there was a report that air traffic in the Washington, D.C. area had been cleared out and mostly grounded. That turned out not to be the case. As it happens, there was some personnel shortages at the air traffic control station in Winchester, Virginia, which actually controls the approaches to both Dulles and Reagan airports. And I'm assuming that there was some disruption in that air corridor, but it was not closed by any means. So by the end of the show, we got that one cleared up, but I don't think we got a chance to mention it. I mean, I saw it like literally flip by at 10:59 or something. Anyway, we survived both of these crises, only to have the Starbucks coffee guy decide he was going to run for president, apparently as a centrist independent, whatever that's supposed to mean. I can see no enthusiasm for that anywhere, not just because we're surrounded by Democrats here, but because I don't think anybody has ever had the thought of, wow, that's good coffee. The guy who runs this company should be president. If anything, maybe the waitress or the the barista should be president, but I've never heard anybody say, I think they've replaced my coffee with Folgers Crystal. You know what? Folger for president. This is awesome. I mean, I know coffee peps you up, but it's never worked like that for me. Greg Dworkin is here with us this morning. I assume, what'd you have for breakfast and who should be president as a result?
Well, I'm just saying that when you have Folgers Crystals, you really need to be brewing and drinking, not snorting. I have to tell Trump that because I don't think he gets it.
Yeah, well, I don't know. It sounds like they might have been snorting something. I can't imagine. I mean, some people hate Starbucks coffee. Some people love Starbucks coffee. I just don't know anyone who ever said, wow, this coffee is so good. Imagine if the guy who I guess was responsible for making sure that other people shipped the coffee to the right number of stores was president. I mean,
it's this whole thing about I'm a centrist, yay for me. And we'll see how interested people actually are. I don't think so. I think a lot of this comes from two things. The idea that if Trump can be president, anybody could. And in that sense, I think he's done a wonderful job for America. Every school child now thinks they can be president. That's really what we wanted. Only after Trump is president, people actually start believing it.
That's true. And also Kanye West believes it.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. So the other side of the coin is the lingering myth.
Yes.
That Ross Perot took votes away from Bill Clinton, from H.W. Bush, and thereby allowing Clinton to become president. It isn't true. He took both parties' votes equally, and there's been tons of studies about that. Steve Kornacki actually had a nice write-up about that, but people still believe it. So they think, oh, my goodness, look at that. Trump is egging Howard Schultz on because obviously he'll take away votes from Democrats. Well, what happens if Democrats ignore him and the only promotion he gets is on Fox News from Trump?
Yeah. Oh, then
how is that going to take Democratic votes?
That's probably that's true. I don't watch that, so I wouldn't know. And
you would, right? Exactly.
Whereas other people who do watch would say this coffee guy has got some excellent points, whatever they might be.
Anyway, it's just kind of silly to worry about 2020 now in terms of the size of the field, and it's also silly to worry about how does this play against Donald Trump when we don't even know that Trump's going to be the candidate.
True. Also. Many things could happen between now and then with that guy.
Right. A couple of other things I just have to mention in passing. I think my favorite tweet from Friday was the one that said, my God, LaGuardia Airport has finally contributed something to America.
Yeah, well,
traffic is terrible. The runways are small. The terminals are aging. But at least, a major contribution to the rest of America.
Yeah, anytime you need infrastructure to collapse, LaGuardia is your place.
So Greg Sargent had kind of an interesting take on this whole showdown and how it was covered in the media. Before that, I have to preface my own view that the way to handle Donald Trump is to stop treating him as president and start treating him as reality show host, and remember that everything is about ratings. Now, in your intro, you were talking about what happens if Trump actually shows up with Secret Service and guns and tries to barge into the House of Representatives. And there's kind of two answers to that. As he shows up, you show it on TV with all sorts of captions about Charles I and how he invaded Parliament and wound up losing his head and so on and so forth. And then if he insists on barging through anyway, then you turn the cameras off and you deny him the ability to speak because you can't talk in the dark with no microphone. And both of those things would be devastating for Trump because it has to do with ratings. He doesn't like getting bad press, and he hates being shut out of his chance to talk to the country, although every time he does it on a Miller Kushner speech, he loses more support, a lot more about that because we got a ton of polling to talk about. So, if you treat him as reality TV and say, look, whisper in his ear, you don't want the shutdown in 3 weeks. It's really bad for ratings. That's the only way that moves him.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know if he would know who Charles I is, but it would be for good captions.
Well, that's the thing.
TV.
He wouldn't need to. It would be all over the chyrons, and he only reads chyrons.
Do you ever think began
History
to
by
worry
Chiron.
that we would one day have people breeding Donald Trump spaniels to kind of capitalize on that whole comparison. But I hope not. It's bad enough, the King Charles ones. Okay, well, I don't know that he would get it, but I wouldn't mind seeing him flummoxed. And, well, he gave up. I think ultimately...
All you have to do is have a Chiron that said, Charles first tried this, and they cut his head off. And that's all you need. He doesn't have to go into it in any depth.
They cut his head off. It was a disgrace. When he goes in the dark and tries to speak, that would be a great time to, like, jump him and put one of those imitators in there.
Three imitators. You have them all talking at the same time. And like, which one's the real one? You
Turn the
can't
lights
see.
on. I want to see
You
this
can't
one.
tell.
Right. It would be like the one of those old game shows. And we would all have to try and guess which one was the real Donald Trump. It could be humorous.
Right. Anyway,
also, you might not have
Greg
to let him out of
Sargent
the
writes,
bag.
now that Trump has caved on the shutdown fight.
Yes.
And by the way, there was a really nice piece about that in Real Clear Politics.
Oh.
Yeah. It was along the lines of, finally everybody's united on something.
Oh, yeah. So I see. Here you are.
Everybody agrees that
all agree
Trump
he
caved.
Yeah. Well, good.
So now that Trump has
He's
caved in the
uniter.
shutdown fight, I'd like to suggest that there's a lesson in this outcome about the continuing blight of both sides' media coverage. When Nancy Pelosi canceled Trump's State of the Union speech, the thrust of a great deal of media discussion was that Pelosi had sunk to Trump's level.
Oh, yes.
But this
I remember
precluded
that
any
briefly.
reasoned judgment about whether one side's use of the levers of power was more legitimate and even more mature and considered under the circumstances than the other.
Yes.
And as he wrote in one of his columns, that subtly puts a thumb on the scales for Trump. One of my complaints about normalizing him is stuff like this. Well, the president of the United States said something entirely ridiculous that we'll use our president of the United States voice to tell you about,
Right.
thereby making it sound a little bit more legitimate than it really was. In fact, it's not working. Let me find somebody from the BBC who can read this in a British voice because it'll sound so much smarter. I'll even put glasses on them.
Oh. Wow.
You
That
know,
was
something.
exciting. Yeah. I get you.
This was not remotely a close call. But the point is that once Pelosi held firm and Trump capitulated, both sides' treatment was rendered irrelevant. All that was left behind was the reality of the new power balance in Washington. The obscuring fog of both sidesism also pervaded a great deal of discussion of the substantive differences between Trump GOP and Dems over the shutdown itself. The profound asymmetry of the situation simply did not register in much of the coverage. At the core of all of this is Trump's refusal to exit Foxlandia. The place where Trump always enjoys all the leverage in the 2018 election never happened. The failure to convey the pathology and malice driving this paints a deeply misleading picture. The only answer was for Dems to weather the both sidesism and keep saying, nope, we're not doing it this way. Again, the result was the both sidesism didn't work. And by the way, he has a new book that tries to lay all of that out, and that's one of the reasons why he wrote that tweet storm. But he's right in the sense that that's exactly what was happening. Trump acting like a 6-year-old and Nancy Pelosi acting like a leader and saying, no, Mr. President, this is not the way it's going to happen. And let's treat them both as coming from an equally valid and serious-minded place. Mm-hmm. Well, no. Why don't you just say, this is really silly, and we don't understand why Trump is doing this, but he's doing it anyway.
Yeah.
That would be far more accurate coverage than the crap we got during the shutdown.
Yep, we did get. I mostly avoided reading, but I certainly enjoyed having Greg Sargent note for me. Yes, the coverage that said, "Oh, they're both being petulant children because they're both canceling something on one another."
Something along those lines, and of course, that's not how it worked at all. And so, by the time all of that is said and done, here are the headlines that I had this in the Pundit Roundup this morning, but just to give you an idea of over the weekend. New York Times: a bruised Trump faces uncertain 2020 prospects. His team fears a primary fight. Washington Post had Pelosi does not mess around. Democratic Speaker emerges triumphant from showdown. You wouldn't have known that during the whole process that it was going on. And of course, a whole bunch of polls, including the ABC Post poll that's out today, which basically says 2 years into Trump's presidency, there's a deficit in confidence across government. They don't like Congress. They never like Congress. But as Gary Langer, the pollster, puts it, Americans expected him, Trump, to do a good job handling the deficit. 33% say he's in fact doing so, a 17-point deficit. He likewise trails expectations by 12 points on handling the economy, 11 points on healthcare, and 4 to 9 points on a range of other issues. His challenges extend to his personal ratings as well. 32% see him favorably as a person, 59% unfavorably. That's a scant 2 points from Bill Clinton's record low favorability at the height of the sex scandal that led to his impeachment. Even then, Clinton's job approval was 64 and Trump's is 37. And I think that that's important to emphasize when people say, oh, Clinton, look what happened, and everybody rallied around him. Everybody rallied around him because they liked the economy and they liked what was going on.
Yeah, they were compartmentalizing. That was, I think we began to introduce that term and say, yeah, he's doing a good job as president. I wish he was that way in his personal life, whatever that way was supposed to be.
And they saw it as Trump, partisan issue.
So
they approved of him and said, no, it's just the Republicans trying to get him, which was true. Right. He did stuff. That's also true.
Yes.
But when you try to impeach somebody who's 64%, that's quite different than trying to impeach somebody who did stuff, and here's the proof. And by the way, he's at 37 even before we start. That's the lowest record for a president at this point in office in polls dating back to 72 years. So those of you trying to compare him to Ronald Reagan, as I also say, well, Reagan was unpopular at this point. Well, Reagan was in the middle of a recession.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I never really understood exactly what they meant by that. Well, Reagan wasn't popular then, too. Yeah, I know.
It's a form of both sidesism,
I guess.
Or whataboutism, I should say.
Yeah,
where what you have to do is you have to go find this one point that has nothing to do with anything else and say, see, I've run rings about geologically. Look at this. Reagan and Trump were similar in their approval rating at this point in time in their presidency.
Yeah.
Reagan was once popular. Trump never was. Reagan was in the middle of a recession. Trump isn't. But other than that,
Yeah. Reagan
how's the plane?
So did Trump. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, all right. Well, people do that. I don't know what the point was, but I guess they wanted to show that they had read a book.
Right. So the Washington Post version of this poll, regionally, he's at 37%, which is pretty bad. Regionally, dissatisfaction with the economy was greatest in the West, where 58% of people had expected success, but only 40% said Trump did well. The South had held the highest expectations, with 2/3 optimistic and half approve. The Midwest showed the least disappointment, dropping only 5 points to 54 from 59. So interesting that the Midwest is still holding on to their other reasons for voting for Trump.
Yeah.
Which, I think have a lot to do with Tom Brokaw.
Somehow that happened over the weekend, too.
The Midwesterner who was on Meet the Press Sunday and put his foot in it while talking about a number of things. But he was on this panel with Yamiche and Alcindor, who put him in his place. And he had to apologize. But what he said was he was on a panel discussion. This was the Politico write-up.
Yeah.
And he was talking about national unity, a particularly divisive time in the country's history, or divisive. We can have a fight over that because it's a divisive term. Brokaw prefaced this response by saying, a lot of this we don't want to talk about, arguing he hears from some Republicans that they view Hispanics as a new constituency for Democratic lawmakers and therefore a political threat. But he said there's also some who are simply opposed to welcoming Hispanics into the American fold due to the color of their skin.
Yes.
And I hear when I push people a little harder, I don't know whether I want brown grandbabies, he said. I mean, that's part of it. It's the intermarriages going on. And the cultures are conflicting with each other. All right, so far so good. He's reporting.
Okay.
Okay, he's reporting what Republicans tell him.
All right, got it. All right, he wasn't worried about that.
And then he adds, well, he is.
That's
the part that's bad. So he continues, I also happen to believe, now he's saying his own beliefs, that Hispanics should work harder at assimilation. That's one of the things I've been saying for a long time. Yes, we know.
Has he?
They ought not to be just codified in their communities, but make sure all their kids are learning to speak English, that they feel comfortable in the communities, and it's going to take outreach on both sides, frankly, because this is like a both sides issue.
Oh, yeah. He thought he was coming back to the middle on that one.
Right. So among those who voiced their displeasure was Joaquin Castro, whose twin brother Julian is running for president.
Yes.
And also Yamiche Alcindor was right there. And she said, I'd like to say we also need to adjust for what we think of as America. You're talking about assimilation. I grew up in Miami, she said. where people speak Spanish, but their kids speak English.
Yeah.
And the idea that we think Americans can only speak English as if Spanish and other languages wasn't always part of America is in some ways troubling. Now, anybody who grew up in an immigrant household heard different languages at home, even if you spoke English outside. And so Brokaw got a bunch of pushback from that, shall we say.
Yes.
And wound up apologizing.
Well, that's the right thing to do, is apologize. That was very, I don't know what to tell you. That was very out of touch.
It really
and
is very
elderly.
strange. It was out of touch. It was tone deaf. It was like, why are you doing this?
It's and it's something you come to expect. Unfortunately, I mean, you don't forgive it any, but you come to expect it. Actually, as people age, they tend to, I don't know, they tend to let that stuff slip.
I expected him to say, I'm so sorry for bringing up this divisive issue. I really didn't mean to do that. Let's talk about Israel-Palestine now.
I guess. I mean, how old-fashioned a thing to say it. Oh, well, they need to. I don't know what he meant. I assume he just was fumbling for words, and he's not usually bad at that, getting codified in your community.
No, I think you're right. He was trying to get back to the both sides thing and saying, well, there must be something on the other side that would balance this. Otherwise, it makes it sound like I'm calling Republicans racist. I don't want to do that. Oh. So let me say something else that makes me look like
I'm not a Republican, racist. I'm racist, and so that's
I'm both sides.
Okay.
So.
That was very odd. And, I mean, what I don't know, it's like a so 25, 30, 50 years ago thing to be worried about assimilation of Hispanics in the country. That seems so crazy. But all right.
I want people to speak English. How else am I going to eavesdrop?
Why? Yeah, that happens. There was another story about, similar, I guess. The eavesdropping thing made me remember about a Duke University, I guess, graduate professor who also stepped in at this time talking about Chinese students speaking Chinese to one another. What a crime.
That guy's gone now. Or that lady's gone, or whoever it was.
That's right. We'll be back, though. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin is still with us. As we exited, we brought up another strange story of yet more weird, pervasive racism in places you were not supposed to have to expect to deal with it. Duke University, although I guess probably a lot of you out there saying, what do you mean? What? Racism at Duke University? You're kidding. No way. Well, yeah, it does happen. But I was startled by this one. And so you grabbed the BBC report on it here, Greg, right?
Right, which is why all the words are spelled funny.
Okay, please, I want you to make sure you spell favorite correctly. You could lose job opportunities if you... Yeah, well, please, don't even get me started with the 2M thing. Why you would add letters, I don't know. Okay.
Program me.
Yeah, right. Who else are you going to program, right?
I don't want you to program anybody else. I want you to program me. That's what it says. Dr. Neely, who is the person in question, said the two faculty members had asked if she had photos of students on the master's program before picking out a number of first-year students, quote, who they observed speaking Chinese, in their words, very loudly in the student lounge study areas. I know they meant very loudly because they capitalize very loudly, and everybody knows.
You're supposed to read
capitalize something when you're writing. It means you're yelling.
Yes, or correct.
So that makes it even more very loudly.
Yes.
It was more loudly even than you appreciated. And of course, I am reminded of where I grew up, which was an Italian, Polish, Irish neighborhood. And when you went over other people's houses, you heard Greek, you heard Italian, you heard Polish. This was like normal. People would speak in their native tongue at home and then English on the streets.
That was an American thing to do.
And if you encountered somebody whose language you didn't understand, obviously what you do is you speak louder because that will fix everything.
Yes, although I have heard some very interesting tricks of if you're having difficulty speaking with somebody who does speak limited English, but as a second language, that sometimes trying to speak English to them in their accent works. But but a lot of times people just think
it gets you punched in the nose too.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying.
What are you making fun of me?
This is the way you hear it. I'm trying to help you. I hear you.
Don't make fun of me. Forget about it.
Yeah.
Dr. Neely said that the faculty members told her, quote, they wanted to write down the names so that they could remember them if the students ever interviewed for an internship or asked to work with them for a master's project. They were disappointed that these students were not taking the opportunity to improve their English and were being so impolite as to have a conversation that not everybody on the floor could understand.
What
the international student, she continued, and again, this is capitalized, so she must be yelling,
yes.
Please, 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 keep these unintended consequences in mind when you choose to speak in Chinese in the building. I'm sure she thought she was trying to help.
I don't know.
That's not helping.
It's not helping. I have a feeling, quite honestly, I question the story that any other faculty members came and asked for pictures of students because they wanted to write it down so two racists came to me and said this racist thing. It wasn't me. And I just thought, please keep these unintended consequences. That's the new word for economic anxiety is unintended consequences.
Yeah, pretty much.
But
so she got into trouble over that.
Amazing. Well, yes, and well, she should. I don't even understand, honestly, the premise of complaining that I can't understand someone else's conversation. That's because it's not yours.
Yeah,
What do
you?
What do you mean?
Oh, again, that's why I said that about eavesdropping. I'm really annoyed that I'm trying to eavesdrop on these people, and they're not helping me.
Yeah, and that comes up a lot, and they're always
like when I go to the opera, I could see the words on the top there. So at least, where is it here? Yes. I want people, if they're going to speak in their own language, I want an instant translation on the wall so that the entire cafeteria can know what they're talking about. Yeah. And why is this a problem?
Paranoid racism. They think that, oh my God, what if they're talking about me? They're laughing. They must be saying talking about stupid white people don't, whatever.
In fact, given what I did to them, I know they're talking about me.
Yeah, right. Could be. Also, by the way, Dr. Neely, no point in piling on her shoes gone, but I guess some administrator should have said, don't just hand out photos of the students to anybody who asks, so you can write down their name, by the way. That's probably not smart either. So failure on your part on the privacy front, and you're also a racist and a paranoid idiot, and, maybe shouldn't be there. So I guess she's not. That's awfully dumb. And apparently it was the second time she'd done something similar, and I can't even fathom where she got the idea that you should regulate how people talk on their time off in a lounge.
So, I think, this should spur people to learn other languages, not make people only speak English. Too. But, that's just me.
I guess they eliminated the foreign languages department at Duke as well, because no one wants people speaking those crazy foreign languages on campus and confusing people who don't know what the conversation is about.
Right, on a college campus of all places. Can you imagine?
Horrible.
So, other stories I want to mention just in passing. There's not a lot to say about this, but I want to acknowledge it, and that is U.S. Representative Walter Jones, who is Democrats' favorite Republican. He's 75. And he's a 24-year veteran in Congress representing the 3rd District in, I believe, North Carolina, right?
Yes, that's right.
The statement says that Jones' health has declined since he broke a hip last week.
Oh.
And he's been battling an undisclosed illness since last fall. He's now in hospice.
Breaking a hip tends to do that. I don't know exactly what it is.
Well, it's the underlying illness, I'm sure, whatever that is.
Okay.
So he's retiring when his term ends in 2020. And, he's out of circulation.
Yes.
And his health is deteriorating.
Yeah, he is a really interesting guy. And he comes from a family that had previously been Democratic. And he was, I think, the first Republican.
That happened in the South, didn't it?
Yes. But
Richard Shelby's like that.
Yeah, that's true. But in a weird development, he was actually a big booster of freedom fries back in the day when the French were wisely refusing to get involved in the Iraq War, and they decided to rename French fries into freedom fries. And then a couple years later, he was mortified to have had anything to do with it, and as well as his support for the Iraq War. And apparently, according to a couple of articles I read over the weekend, spent an awful lot of his time in Congress for the past 10 plus years writing letters to the families of service members killed in Iraq, apologizing for having supported the war, which is pretty amazing. You don't find that a lot.
Well, North Carolina has a license plate that says First and Freedom. Did you know
that? No, because they're not.
Issued at the end of 1974 to honor the Mecklenburg decision of 1775. And, people didn't necessarily like North Carolina foot dragging on other issues of freedom.
Yeah.
But it was like a live free or die from, New Hampshire. So if they're First in Freedom, I don't know if they still have that license plate. Then obviously when you say freedom fries, he's all in because, freedom. North Carolina.
It was about the fries. Now it's First in Flight because of Kitty Hawk and the Wright brothers who were from Ohio. But okay.
Right. But I like that, First in Fries.
Yeah, right. Really, but if it's any F.
Or maybe just the more colloquial, do you want fries with that? They can just have that on their license plate.
Yeah, right.
It's non-controversial. Everybody says that.
Eventually, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well,
so let's get back to some more substantive stuff. Of course, on Friday was Mueller Friday, so we had the Roger Cohen stuff going on. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting article that I'm only halfway through from Marcy Wheeler, our friend Marcy, in the New Republic called "How Trump Suborns Perjury," even without BuzzFeed's explosive report about Michael Cohen. Remember that BuzzFeed controversy that came and went?
Yes.
Because the shutdown and Trump, cleverly manipulating the media to only talk about him. The evidence shows that the president has persuaded his associates to lie to Congress and the feds.
Okay.
And, Roger Cohen using a whole bunch of Godfather 2 analogies doesn't help any, but does set the stage for the whole idea that Trump doesn't have to directly tell anybody to lie. Everybody knows what he wants.
Yeah. I guess you can sort of wink at people and everybody understands what he's after.
Right. Marcy says there's no reason to doubt after that whole controversy. There's no reason to doubt that Trump has, in fact, repeatedly instructed subordinates to lie to Congress and law enforcement authorities, including lies that amount to crimes. The difference is that the media outlets that reported these other cases didn't say explicitly the president directed his aides to lie. Mm-hmm. That's the magic word. Another important difference is the way in which Trump gets his subordinates to lie, which has served to delay the moment when we all admit he's quite clearly suborning perjury. Okay?
Yes.
So BuzzFeed calls it the first known example, but it wasn't, Marcy says. In September 2017, the New York Times revealed that over a weekend at Badminster, I keep reading that as weekend at Bernie's, White House aide Stephen Miller drafted a memo explaining why the president was firing former FBI Director James Comey, the event that immediately precipitated the launch of the special counsel's investigation. The letter cited comments Comey had made about the FBI's investigation into Russia's interference in the 2016 election. Don McGahn, White House counsel, later massaged those references in Comey's actual termination letter to suggest Comey was being fired for a different reason, though Trump would admit that the Russian investigation was the actual cause days later on television. That was an interview I remember he gave to Lester Holt. Given that McGahn's letter was sent to the FBI director, it amounted to a lie to the Bureau. Now, again, a reminder for those who don't know Marcy, she's got a fantastic eidetic memory and really into the details here. Mm-hmm. Don't argue details with Marcy unless you have backup.
And a lot of time.
In writing, and a lot of time. So then last June, the Times published the January 2018 letter in which Trump's lawyers admitted to Mueller's office that the president dictated a short but accurate response to the New York Times article on behalf of his son Donald Jr. The letter tied that statement directly to Don Jr.'s testimony to Congress about the infamous Trump Tower meeting in 2016, in which Don Jr. sought to procure damaging information about Hillary Clinton from Russian agents. We have to remember all of this stuff is going on here. I mean, it's right there in plain sight. And so she gives that as another instance. Mm-hmm. And other less clear-cut examples But BuzzFeed wasn't squeamish about identifying it, and that's where they got into trouble. So the special counsel didn't exonerate Trump with his response, Marcy goes on to say. And, the difference between ordering somebody to lie and ensuring they follow your message out of abject loyalty may not save Trump. And in this administration, the president doesn't need to order his subordinates to lie for him. It's a daily matter of course. Mueller's team seems to be wise to that, even if Congress and much of the media aren't quite there yet. So I think a very important point, especially if people think that somehow or other Mueller exonerated Trump, which just isn't true.
Well, they shouldn't think that, and I guess they were in danger of having people think that, and then they got distracted by the shutdown, so good play.
So we have that. We have, of course, not just Howard Schultz, but Kamala Harris, and, we'll see if Cory Booker's too far behind in terms of announcing presidential stuff. Let's see if there's anything else that really we would just want to make sure that we cover. There's two pieces here from the Pundit Roundup that I thought were very, very well written. One was from Carlos Lozado in the Washington Post. What would it take is the title of the article, and the idea is, how do you go about impeaching somebody in a hyper-partisan atmosphere? And the answer is you got to make a solid case, but that we're not quite there yet. And the other one is from David Frum, who says Roger Stone's arrest is the signal for Congress to act. Mueller's looking at crimes, but it's up to legislators to safeguard the country because they're doing different things. Again, with a reminder that in Watergate days, in fact, there really were parallel things going on. You had Leon Jaworski doing his thing while Congress did theirs. And you have some stuff about impeachment from the ABC Washington Post poll. The American people have mixed feelings about investigating Trump, with clear majorities wanting newly empowered Democrats to dig into his personal finances and foreign ties, which is fair. But most believing Congress shouldn't begin impeachment proceedings. The published cautiousness extends to his expectations for the forthcoming report from Robert Mueller, Bobby Three Sticks, who has been examining ties between Russia and Trump's 2016 campaign. Half of Americans report they've some confidence, or none at all, that the Mueller report will be fair and even-handed, and 43% say they have at least a good amount of confidence in its fairness. So that means that just looking at how the public sees it, and we can explain why, but how the public sees it, Congress and those who want to impeach still have a lot of work to do. It was helpful for Yoni Applebaum and David Leonhardt to make the case in public and writing. Dave Leonhardt did that in the New York Times in January at the beginning of the month, and Applebaum in the Atlantic about why the impeachment process itself is a process, including explaining what you're doing. There are those who feel like you have to wait for Mueller to actually have some evidence that people will believe. You have others who think that Congress should develop that evidence on their own, for example, by subpoenaing his tax returns. That would do it. It's just a clear cut and dry numbers game there. But the fact of the matter is, in my view, that most of the public just really has tuned all this stuff out. It's kind of like wake me when you have something that's concrete. Otherwise, it's just this person said this and that person said that, and I don't know what to think.
In
the meantime, I got to pay my bills, and you just
yes. Well, there are definitely people who will be tuned out.
You just ruin the economy, so I'm not paying attention to Mueller right now.
Although giving them a headline that says Trump impeached tends to make them tune back in.
It does, but that's too late. You really want them to have a sense of what's going on before you actually vote on impeachment.
Well, okay. Wake up, everybody. I don't know how you're going to do that. But
one way is to have public hearings. Public hearings can be riveting. We saw that with the Kavanaugh hearings. We saw that with, of course, the original Watergate hearings. And depending upon what's going on, the public will watch if it's something of interest to them.
That's true, and we just have to have the right setting, find the right panel, the right committee lineup.
Right. Now, along those lines, let me ask you a question. This is a process thing, which I don't fully understand. For those of you out there in the listening community, Dave is my go-to expert as to how come Congress is doing this. I don't understand the House. It turns out that there's a Senate Intel Committee, which is continuing to function, and then there's the House Intel Committee. And after the election, all of a sudden, Adam Schiff is the chairperson and not Devin Nunes.
Right.
So they'd like to investigate some things. And it turns out that they're, according to the news article, somewhat limited because the Republicans haven't offered committee membership yet.
Yes, right.
So what does that mean, and why is it stopping? I mean, it seemed like when Devin Nunes was chairman, he would do whatever he wanted to.
That's
to
true.
hell with the minority.
Right, that is true, and they should probably just go ahead and do that. I saw an article about it, and it does not make any real sense to me, which doesn't mean that we can't explain what's going on. It's just that, and I saw Spencer Ackerman, I guess, had written it up too, and I saw him speaking about it on Twitter, and somebody tagged me in this thing and asked the same question. So yeah, I can't find a reason why they wouldn't do it. I think it has to do with tradition and collegiality, which is bizarre. And I think what it comes down to is that Democratic members, including Adam Schiff, are uncomfortable pushing forward without Republicans who will then sit there and demand to be trounced and pushed around by the majority. And I guess they want them underfoot when they do it. And it's weird. There's nothing I can find in the rules that demands that there be Republicans there at all. Here's one of the problems. I don't know what the usual rules were from, like, say, the last Congress for the Intelligence Committee in the House. And one of the reasons is I went to the website where the rules are supposed to be parked and they're not there. One of the reasons they might not be there is incompetence. One of the other reasons they might not be there is if this committee has not yet constituted itself, it won't have any rules yet. Remember how the House does business. So just as the House, in reconvening every 2 years, readopts new rules, committees largely have to do the same. But on the other hand, what that means is that any rules that used to be in place in the Intelligence Committee that required, and many committees have a requirement that says you can't conduct any business unless there's at least one member of the minority present, some cases two. There are such rules among committees. Why they do that? Out of this antiquated idea of fairness, because Republicans almost never honor those rules, but they could be there. The thing is, they're not there now, and the committee would have an opportunity to change those rules if it wanted to. So if they really thought that the Republicans were frustrating their purpose by purposefully refusing to name members to the committee, they could simply say,
what we in the Nixon era used to call stonewalling.
Right. Okay. There's nothing in the there's nothing in the committee rules at the moment, I guess. And the House rules, the thing about the Intelligence Committee is because it's a permanent select committee, the formation of it was a little bit different and a little bit weird. And there's stuff in the permanent general House rules that govern the organization of the Intelligence Committee, none of which says anything about a minority presence there. The general House rules about committees typically say you can't do business without a quorum, and a quorum is typically defined as a majority of members. Well, we have that, all Democrats. So you go convene a meeting and say, this, for the 116th Congress, the rules of the Intelligence Committee are that a majority of the committee is all that's necessary to do business. Adopt that rule. There'll be no votes against it unless Devin Nunes decides to show up. Then you win, 12-1 or whatever the count is, and move forward from there. Another way of curing it is to simply have the entire House pass a resolution. Apparently the problem was they wanted to release to Mueller's office transcripts of people they had interviewed and interrogated in the past, in the last Congress under Nunes and the Republicans,
right,
and
because
didn't have the authority
the exact
to
language,
do it.
You might be able to show they lied.
Right. So they haven't been able to send those transcripts to Mueller's office yet because they didn't have the authority when Republicans ran it. They refused to grant it. Now Democrats actually really do have that authority, but they're balking because I guess they think the old rules still apply, or they're going to agree to proceed as if they do. And
well, that's
maybe
the other
it's their
part of the
intention
procedure
to
question
do that.
there, because when is it because the committee's rules say that, and when is it that, well, the chairman can overrule that at any time, which seemed like the old committee ran
Yes.
that way.
Well, right.
We can't do this except
That's
that the
true.
chairman can.
Yeah, I mean, he just ran roughshod. He broke all of his own rules, and nobody did anything about it because who are you going to complain to? Republican leadership? They weren't going to help you. So, it's different now, and you could, if it worries you to do the same thing, then do something different.
Yeah,
Go
pass
and
a rule that says you're going to do it instead of just doing it.
And then abide by the rules and say the difference between me and you is I followed the rules and you didn't.
Right.
That's easy.
So, I would put a rule in there, something that says something along the lines of, we're going to follow the courtesy rules and expect that the Republicans are going to cooperate. If they don't, the chair can overrule that and do X.
I mean, you can try and get away with that. The Intelligence Committee had, before Nunes, traditionally been a pretty collegial committee, and it happens on the Senate side.
And so if that's your game, if what you're really trying to do is reestablish that this is going to be a collegial committee, that's not going to happen if Nunes and other people like him are on it. It's just not.
No. So I don't know. So I guess the easiest way, if you really wanted to, if Schiff had it in his head that he's absolutely positively going to have that rule later on that says there has to be 2 members of the minority present in order to do any business. For whatever reason, you want to shoot yourself in that foot.
Right, and neither of them could be Devin Nunes because he's a known leaker who cheats. I mean, just put that in the
that would be
rules.
wise to do. But you can have the House take care of that. And I guess, they were busy in the last week trying to make sure that the United States didn't collapse, I guess. And now they can come back and say, look, as an order of the House, we're going to release those transcripts.
Right. So it's going to be a very interesting, that's another question. Can Pelosi overrule them and just do it as Speaker?
Well, it won't be Pelosi overruling. It will be Pelosi asking the House as a body, how do you feel about releasing those transcripts? And when a majority says, yes, we should do it, she says, well, I agree with the majority.
Okay, will of the people in the people's house. That's just what we have to do. Sorry. Yeah.
So that could happen. I don't really know why they are delaying this way. Spencer got a little upset and, I guess he thought we were saying, you don't know what you're talking about, Spencer. No, you reported it accurately. The people involved in the situation told him what they were thinking, and he reported it correctly, and we didn't mean for it to be, now you've made a mistake. This happens all the time, and I should, if people are somehow new to dealing with this sort of situation, I guess I'll tell you, this is not the first time, by a long shot, that I've run into members of the House, sometimes longtime incumbent members of the House, chairs of committees, who say, no, the rules say X. And I say, no, the rules say Y. And they say, psh, who are you going to believe? Idiot blogger or me? And everybody says, we'll believe the chairman. He's got a suit and he's the chairman. And then it turned out to be, nope, that's actually wrong. The idiot blogger told you correctly what the situation was. And then the other person, the chairman reverses position and says, I've come to this brilliant conclusion. Guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to do Y.
And not acknowledge the idiot blogger who told me that. Yes.
Yes, that happens quite frequently.
That we're used to.
So it's happening again, I think, and you'll just see, I guess if after a certain amount of time they feel like they're justified in accusing the Republicans of dragging their feet, and they are, then they'll want to do something different, and then poof, it will be that thing which we told you they could do.
Right. One of those things then is therefore to go to the House as a whole and have the House as a whole decide that they're going to do that.
And that's
do they take the mace off the wall when they do that?
Well, when they have that vote, the mace will be, they'll probably debate the bill with the mace down in the committee of the whole House on the State of the Union. And then when they vote on final passage of it, the mace goes back up.
See, the things that I have learned, I just want to share.
See? All right. Yeah, everyone remember the mace. That's how you can tell what's going on.
Right. Because when the mace is down, it's the committee as a whole, and when the mace is up, it's the House of Representatives doing their thing. So that's it for me. I'm just going to leave you with all those thoughts. I'm going to scoot off to work, but thanks so much. It was really interesting and entertaining. I like the way I like learning about how Congress works, which is one of the reasons why I have been listening to that idiot blogger, for like a decade, because I learned stuff. This is Greg Gorkin speaking with my good friend Kagro in the morning. You should listen to him too. Another
now.
idiot blogger, Marcy Wheeler, had a wonderful piece about the details of suborning perjury. You should listen to her, too. We all used the idiot blog together, by the way, once upon a time. But I'll be back on Wednesday, and we'll do it again. Take care.
Thanks very much, Greg. We'll see you again soon. And let's see. Yes, I'm about a minute away from the next break. I'll tell you this, and I know you have to run, so maybe you can pick this up on the podcast, or maybe it's still coming over your speakers. If you're actually interested in where that mace is and what it means. Another hint you'll get if you're watching on C-SPAN. I don't know if you ever noticed this one, but occasionally if you're watching C-SPAN and they're debating, and once in a while, the person up in the chair with the gavel knocking it on the table there on the rostrum or the desk up there will be addressed. People will get up and ask permission to speak, and they'll be addressing Mr. Chairman or Madam Chairman. And you say, that's interesting. What about Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker? Okay, well, maybe it's because it's not Nancy Pelosi in the chair and she's designated some other member to take over. That's why they're calling them Mr. Chairman and not Mr. Speaker. And that's not it. It's because they are, at that time, serving as the chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union. The Committee of the Whole. And that's why they would address them as Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman. And then when the mace goes back up, they say Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, even when Nancy Pelosi isn't there herself. They are functioning either as Speaker, not what do they call them, Speaker Pro Tem, or they are functioning as the chair of the Committee of the Whole. And occasionally, if you're there at exactly the right time, when you see them switch in between the committee and the House itself, you'll see different people occupy the chair. The same person won't act as chair of the Committee of the Whole and Speaker Pro Tem at the same time. It's very weird. It's necessary somehow, but fascinating to see. Well, to me. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. So there you have it. Greg on his way to work, and you with a new understanding of the way the House switches between the Committee of the Whole and the House itself. So also interesting, I think, just reiterate for you since we're on the topic. When Democrats are in the majority, they typically, by rule, permit delegates who otherwise have no vote in they can't vote in the House of Representatives, but delegates and the how do they style their representative, the resident commissioner for Puerto Rico, who oddly enough, for whatever reason, is elected to a 4-year term. I don't know if that's still the case, but at least when I was working there, the resident commissioner for Puerto Rico, different style, different title than delegates like you would get, say, for the District of Columbia or for I guess what you call overseas territories, American Samoa and Guam. But Puerto Rico has a resident commissioner, which is weird because they're living here. I mean, they're not. I guess they're the commissioner for Puerto Rico in residence in Washington, D.C. I don't know what the provenance of that title is, but they're elected to 4-year terms, which I just don't really, I don't know why. They just were, and I found that weird, and maybe you will too. Anyway, in addition to, so now you can tell the difference by where the mace is, which you ordinarily, I don't know if you can really even see it in the C-SPAN view or not. I guess the big one from the back, you can tell where the mace is. And then by how they're addressing the chair, either as speaker or chair. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, they actually vote differently. That is, the options for voting are styled differently. And I can't remember which one's which, but you vote aye or nay. Do they say nay still? There might be aye or no. And then there's yes or no. And when they're voting yes, I can't remember which one is which. It's the, they're in the House, and aye is in, I don't know whether that's in the House or the one's in the Committee of the Whole. I don't know. That was never important enough to me to remember, actually. But that's a weird thing, too. And occasionally you'll see them vote in different ways. So, I don't know. Just one of those other weird things. I don't know what the difference is or what made them decide to style the affirmative votes differently as between the two. I guess it was probably to keep track of which one they were in, but there are so many other ways of keeping track. But this way, the printed record, I guess, also reflects whether they were voting in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. It's just, I don't know. It's a weird fiction, and I don't know what else to tell you about it, except that you're one of the maybe 15 people in the country that know that now. So there you have it. Oh, there are allegedly more people listening to the podcast than those 15, but only 15 of you are still paying attention. That's probably what's going on. Okay, let's move on. There's more out there. Let's see. There are a couple of things I know that Greg mentioned that I said, oh, we should talk more about them. We should probably read more of Marcy's article, too. Although I think my takeaway from Marcy's article is that I don't think Trump typically, I was wondering whether, I'm torn between whether he affirmatively attempts to avoid saying things like, I want you to lie to Congress, or tell that guy a lie, or because, here's the thing, I think he may have seen gangster movies in the past where the characters surmise that it's important that the boss of bosses not be seen, not be heard directly giving orders, but he wants to say things in ways that are understood to do things, but that when it comes to courtroom testimony against him, no one will be able to say truthfully that he did, in fact, order this thing to happen. And that's supposed to, be meaningful in some way. I think outside of the movies, it probably isn't really meaningful. But on the other hand, so on the one hand, I know he loves those sorts of movies and he loves to imitate that stuff. On the other hand, he's short on attention and he likes to blather like me. But he likes to blather about committing crimes, and I like to blather about his committing crimes too, but not my own. So I think he forgets from time to time. And I don't think he says, well, here's what I want you to do. I want you to lie to Congress. I think he lays out the lie he wants. I think he actually blurts out, look, all you have to do is tell him, this, that, and the other thing. And they're going to say, why did you tell him to do this? And you say, I didn't tell him to do this. He did it on his own. Or it was up to him. I knew nothing about it. And he concocts the stories, which are lies. And very often the lie is not creative at all. It's just tell them you didn't know anything about that. And they did it all by himself. And for a while, Michael Cohen was telling the same story, right? Oh, I arranged the Stormy Daniels thing. He knew nothing about it. I just thought I would charge into the breach and help him out because I like him so much. And he's such a great guy that I would take care of it myself. So they're not creative lies. They're just regular lies. But I don't know that he instructs anyone to lie. I mean, that's substantively what he does. But if you say, did he instruct you to lie? I mean, in their minds, they probably would say, no, he never said, Michael, you should lie to Congress. He said, you should say this thing to Congress, which is a lie, which I understood to be a lie, which I understood that he understood was a lie, and that was intended to be understood by the audience, not as a lie, but as the truth. But, also all the elements are there. But did he ever say to me, I need you to lie to Congress? No, he didn't do that. I think that Trump thinks he can probably get away with that. I don't know why, but he's just an idiot and it works in the movies. Speaking of things working in the movies, I do notice that the Washington Post and many others are spending an awful lot of time trying to figure out where Donald Trump's repeated nonsense about women with tape over their mouths being smuggled across the border comes from. And some, unfortunate headlines, you have to settle on some sort of language to use in reporting these stories, and I can't tell for sure whether the reporters are really that blind or it's just like, well, the limitations of language, where they write headlines that say things like, where did Trump's idea of women being smuggled across the border with tapes on their mouths come from? The experts are baffled. They say things like that, and I the experts are not baffled. Unless, of course, you're going to the experts on, is there such a story circulating inside the federal government? Is there a factual story about that? Those sorts of experts, I guess, could be baffled. But experts in what is Donald Trump up to? What is he doing right now? None of those experts are baffled. You're just not talking to any of them. It's not that it's not that nobody knows where it comes from. It's that it comes from him watching television or movies and becoming confused as between television and movies and reality. That's really all there is to it. And as a matter of fact, I did see somebody circulating this again today. They were circulating it as though they had, come across this shocking discovery. But I have seen many, many people name it before. And I am not, I'm not familiar with the movie here, but I guess, let me see, what's the, I can't even remember the name of the movie, but I've seen people now say, this is taken almost verbatim from this film that there's this whole scene in there of women, in fact, being smuggled across the border with duct tape over their mouths. And I can't remember the name of the movie now. It escapes me entirely, and I'd never seen it. And it begins with an S, and maybe you've run into it or thought, oh yeah, that is the same as this movie. And I've seen it, and I thought I would put this thread aside, but I guess I didn't bother to do it because it just seemed so dumb as a story. But how did I know I was going to end up back on this thing anyway? But yeah, this particular movie has in it both women being smuggled across the border with tape on their mouths in the back of cars and alleged prayer rugs being found in the desert near border crossing areas. Another persistent myth in Trump's and Trump supporters' panoply. Is that the right word for of nonsense that they've got? Here we go. I found it. As a matter of fact, Kurt, Audible Video, tweeted it to me, but it wasn't him saying, "Oh my God, I've discovered this thing." He just said, "Hey, take a look at this," and it is a tweet thread by somebody going by. You remember when the fashion was to go by alt. White House employee or alt, various federal agencies, and the idea was that they were like resistance people. I don't know what the provenance of to use the same words again over and over. The provenance of this styling of people's usernames here, but this one is alt immigration, and you'll find them under the address of alt_USCIS. And anyway, regardless of whether they really have anything to do with immigration or otherwise, this is from, let's see, is this from today, early this morning, 2 a.m, whatever they were doing up with this nonsense. But it's true. They've hit the nail on the head in terms of where I think this is coming from. Here it is. Sicario is the name of the movie. And this is, they feel like they've stumbled on this. I've seen this 4 or 5 times. Circulated on Twitter, and the thread goes like this. It starts out with, appropriately enough, OMFG. Remember when Trump said terrorists are leaving prayer rugs at the border? I just realized he must have seen this scene in the movie Sicario, Sicaro. I know I am right, which is scary AF, how that goes in the screen grab of the film, and it certainly looks for all the world like there are, is that a DEA agent, according to the back of his jacket, and a couple other folks in Border Patrol uniform finding prayer rugs out in the desert. And he goes on and shows the scene and has video of it. And 25 minutes into the movie, we are at taped women in the back of a van. The president gets his immigration crisis information from on-demand television viewing, I guess. Judge for yourself. Never say never. And side by side with his tweet about we've found prayer rugs out here, right? The nameless rancher. And then side by side with the screen grab from Stars on Demand, Sicario, Day of the Soldado is what the name of the movie is. I got zero idea what this thing is about, but there are the prayer rugs that they think they're finding in this movie. All right, what else did they say? 90 minutes into the movie, duct tape over their faces shows up. I am convinced this movie was Trump's border crisis research. This has to be what Trump watched, because it also has a scene where Mexican cars are better than our border agency's cars. Remember that story? Under any other circumstances, I would have assumed that the tweets above are dumb and I need to go to sleep, but not now. And there you got it. It's got all the elements of Trump's border crisis story reserve. The prayer rugs in the desert, the duct tape faces of women, and the super vehicles outrunning even the best of the best of the best stuff that we give to our guys. I can't believe it. So, no experts are baffled. Experts are baffled as to how he became president and how he stays president, given that everyone can see that his idea of how to justify immigration policy comes from television movies. But, whatever. We're stuck. There we are. Okay, let's see. Let's move on to a couple other topics. We've got any number of things to explore here. One, I guess we should at least take note of the official action finally here. Treasury Department lifts sanctions on 3 Russian firms with ties to Oleg Deripaska. CNN reports. Kevin Bone, B-O-H-N, on this report from yesterday. Pausing the video that comes up. Let's see. The Trump administration on Sunday formally lifted sanctions on 3 Russian firms with links to Oleg Deripaska, including Rusal, the world's second largest aluminum producer, which is a great idea because of how strongly we're protecting American metal and metal manufacturing industries here in the United States. I saw Trump tweeting this morning that once again the lie that new steel mills are opening all over America. All the steelworking jobs are coming back. Anyway, on December 19th, way back then, the Treasury Department notified Congress of its intent to lift the sanctions, saying the companies were sanctioned because of their ownership and control by Deripaska, not for the conduct of the companies themselves. The Treasury Department said that Rusal and EN Plus Group, the holding company of the Russian aluminum giant, as well as energy firm JSC Eurosib Energo, I'm not sure how they would pronounce the G in that one, had made significant restructuring and corporate governance changes to diminish Deripaska's ownership and sever his control to allow them to meet the criteria to be delisted within the 30 days. I don't know whether they actually did those things or not, but based on my understanding of how the Trump administration works, I guess the fact that they say that there has been significant restructuring means that there has not been significant restructuring. But there you go. That's what they're saying. Where do we leave off? EN Plus, Rusal, and ESE have reduced Oleg Deripaska's direct and indirect shareholding stake in those companies and severed his control. The Treasury Department said in a statement, this action ensures that the majority of directors on the EN Plus and Rusal boards will be independent directors, including U.S. and European persons who have no business, professional, or family ties to Deripaska, and that independent U.S. persons vote a significant block of the shares of EN Plus. Okay, I doubt it. Sanctions on Deripaska remain intact, in case you were wondering. The companies have also agreed to unprecedented transparency for Treasury into their operations by undertaking extensive ongoing auditing, certification, and reporting requirements. All sanctions on Deripaska continue in force, Treasury said in its statement. Democrats and some Republicans had said they believe the Treasury Department had cut a bad deal that doesn't sufficiently prevent the Russian oligarch from maintaining influence over the company, even though his personal ownership stake in Rusal was reduced. So they say. I'm not even sure that's the case, to be honest with you. Under the arrangement, Deripaska's ownership in EN Plus, allegedly, is what they should be saying, but they don't for some reason, drops from roughly 70% to roughly 45%, and he can vote only 35% of his shares, according to documents explaining the terms of the deal. But his shares are spread out to various entities, including to a foundation he started 2 decades ago, his ex-wife and father-in-law, as well as the sanctioned Russian bank VTB. The terms of the agreement say voting rights of those shares will be given to third parties with no ties to Deripaska. Because if there's anything you know about Russian oligarchs, they have no ties to people. Earlier this month, the Republican-controlled Senate failed to get the 60 votes needed to move a resolution to stop the lifting of sanctions, with 57 voting in favor and 42 opposed. The House passed its own resolution 362 to 53, a tally that included a majority of Republicans. Well, there you have it. Once again, losing in the Senate 57 to 42. That's how you lose in the United States Senate. Okay, so it's on the record. We know this, and we'll come back to it, I am sure, in the near future. Let's see. I grabbed this piece, which I thought was interesting, and I wanted to share it with you all in case you missed it. On Sunday Coast, Lawrence Lewis writing this piece, Trump didn't just shut down the government. He's trying to shut down the very concept of government. Always worth looking at a wider picture here. And let's do it here with this piece. Donald Trump is a deeply stupid man. And that's the end. That's all I have to read you. But that's really there. But he has been able to convince many in the media that he is a smart businessman, says much about them, and nothing about him. His number of bankruptcies speaks for itself. So does the fact that if he had merely invested his inheritance in index funds, he'd be wealthier today than he currently is. All things we know about him. That Trump has become president also says little about him and much about the media. It also says much about our broken electoral system, or our even more disastrously shattered education system, and the ease with which a hostile foreign despot was able to take control of a historically corrupt political party and use unregulated social media to manipulate tens of millions of largely illiterate bigots into voting against their own self-interest. Well, okay. There's that too. The one skill the largely illiterate Trump has mastered is how to use his inherited wealth and intersectional privilege to bully those who didn't inherit such undeserved, unearned good fortune. He abuses women, he attacks minorities, he stiffs his creditors, he rails even at his own sycophants. And when he doesn't get his way, he throws tantrums. Perhaps the world would be a better place right now if those around Trump had kept their pockets stocked with binkies. Anyway, the idea of a border wall, of course, never serious idea. It was actually a stranger-than-fiction mnemonic trick designed by his genius staff to help him remember one of his supposed core ideas during campaign rallies. Because he really is that stupid, and because the inherent racism of the concept must have been viscerally appealing to Trump, but after an electoral drubbing last November that only he didn't see coming, and with the many investigations into his many crimes closing in on him and his family, Trump last December was seething and perhaps flinging his diapers around the Oval Office when somebody realized that the best way to calm him down and spare the White House maintenance crew from excessive scouring and repair work was to find another way for him to hurt people and try to bully his way to self-pacification, hence the government shutdown. Donald Trump owns the shutdown. Of course, he wanted it. He said he'd do it. He said he wouldn't blame the Democrats. We all remember that. So he did it, and then he blamed the Democrats. Because turning one of the most iconic statements about presidential responsibility upside down, Trump accepts responsibility for nothing. The buck always stops somewhere else, and of course, when something good happens, large or small, he falsely claims credit because lying is as basic to his existence as breathing. His entire life is a lie, from pretending to be a smart businessman because his daddy left him a fortune to squander, to his psychologically defining need to exaggerate the size of his hands. The shutdown is a power play and nothing more. Trump claims there's a crisis at the border, which of course is yet another lie. But even if he believed it, this medieval wall, which is really a mnemonic device, wouldn't work anyway. That is one of many reasons why those members of Congress who understand the border best uniformly oppose it. But if the wall wouldn't protect anyone's security, Trump's shutdown is undermining border security and national security and domestic security and the economy, and it is devastating people's lives. Trump's falsely manufactured crisis is creating real crises, and he doesn't care. But as always with Trump, it's also providing him with another opportunity to grift. That may be the only thing he really cares about anyway, not to mention making a certain hostile foreign despot very, very happy. And that might be the real bottom line. Democrats have stood firm against this attempted extortion. They see it for what it is. The modern Republican Party has shattered every norm of democratic governance. The shutdown is an attack on the republic itself. It is an attack on the government by the people. It is an attempt to enforce authoritarian rule against the will of the people. In recent years, shutdowns have become standard Republican Party operating procedure, although they still haven't figured out that they don't work. And in Donald Trump, Republicans have found their hypothesis. He's a liar and a bully and a bigot and a sadist, and they're terrified of crossing him. He's a clear and present danger to the United States, and everything he does must be seen in that context. Every example of the Republican Party's obedient enabling of Trump also must be seen in that context. Trump's desperate attempt to extort his wall is a monument to everything the modern Republican Party has become, and by opposing it, Democrats are not only standing against crazed Republican extremism, they're also standing for the very possibility of the United States continuing to be able to aspire towards its greatest ideals. Well, I don't feel like we got around concretely enough to what exactly I thought we were going to hit on the attacking the very concept of government. It's not just that, of course, Republicans have always said that shutdowns would be a great lesson for people because they would demonstrate that the federal government doesn't do anything, that the government would be shut down and no one would notice, was Newt Gingrich's belief, his original MO on shutdowns. And I think really that's where the modern history of the government shutdown as a Republican tool comes from. And the fact that they never learned differently is kind of amazing too. I think a new generation now of Republicans who may or may not actually remember that Newt Gingrich thought the exact same thing and lost badly. They don't remember that happened. It's also interesting to watch. I was reminded of that this morning when I saw Rick Scott screaming about on Twitter that what we really needed in America was term limits, which is an amazing reaction to this because, of course, one, most people don't really stay in office all that long anyway, but two, the institutional memory loss that goes along with term limits is evidenced right here, right now, by the fact that Republicans were voting once again to shut down the government and refusing to reopen it, thinking that this idea that they had just had pop into their heads that people wouldn't notice that the government was shut down because the government doesn't do anything for people anyway, was brilliant and original. And if they had, actual experience in government, and I mean, Rick Scott is old enough to remember this, but I guess is just too dumb to remember it, which should remember that that's what happened. But he wasn't paying attention to Washington at the time, I'm sure. Anyway, I also think, just want to add my own, and I'll add my own speculation on top of this. I was wondering whether the length of the shutdown was, if not necessarily part of the design, then was a useful byproduct for people who were advising Trump. That is, contractors and subcontractors for government services were being battered by this shutdown. And of course, as we all know, their workers aren't going to see any back pay, at least not, as coming from the federal government, the way direct federal employees are going to get from the legislation that restarted the government. But we heard all about how badly they were doing and how their workers were being hit and they weren't going to get their money. I was wondering whether there was any thought given to stretching out the shutdown such that the financial pressure on contractors and subcontractors grew and grew until the point where incumbent contractors had to close up shop and wouldn't be around when the government restarted, leaving an opportunity for Trump's friends. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption, though it's still aimed at saying thank you to all of you who are supporters of the show. We've made a lot of progress. When we first started this campaign, fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners were donating to help keep us on the air, and now that's down to about 1 in 15, but we've got a long way to go. Remember, it won't take much. Our average monthly donation is currently about $7, for which you're getting 2 hours of great news and entertainment 5 days a week. What's that, 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. But as a wage, well, I think Democrats would be against that. But if we all put our 70 cents together, or even half of us, that'd really be something. And my kids could go to college. Now, that's not all on you, but remember, patreon.com, Patreon.com, is there to make it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X, or David Waldman, or Kagro in the Morning, or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right there where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your continuing support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let me continue with that thought just in case you didn't quite catch it or we cut out a little bit before it. I was thinking that the longer the shutdown went on, the greater the financial pressure on contractors and subcontractors, providers of services to the government, in particular, thinking of things the contracting, not contractors like General Dynamics providing missile systems, for instance, to the United States government, but rather contractors like those who pick up the contract to clean federal office buildings at night, right? So cleaning services who bring people in and clean the place up in between shifts. And various other things, serving the food in cafeterias, in the federal department buildings, etc., and all over the place. And we heard a lot of stories from a lot of those folks who were missing out on those wages. And so you get the sense of how many jobs in the D.C. area, not to mention around the country, are dependent on things like this. People who cooked in the cafeteria to serve tourists, generally speaking, at the Smithsonian museums, etc. And, of course, federal buildings around the country are almost all serviced in that way by federal contractors, not to mention, of course, all the people who do things like supply them with pencils and paper and things like that, who, the local Office Depot or whatever, who's supposed to make a delivery of office supplies and didn't have to for the past month. But you can see a lot of people missed out on a lot of money in this. And I was wondering whether the longer the shutdown went on, the greater the financial pressure on people, particularly who do contracting like this, cleaning services and cooking services, etc., outsourced stuff. And ordinarily, you think, to the extent that Republicans would think about these things at all, they would be thinking, well, these are business people and they tend to vote Republican, perhaps because they're business people. In the old days, they sort of justified things that way. And so we shouldn't be hurting them. But even if it was true, even if they knew that to be the case, that they were Republicans, they might not necessarily be Trump Republicans. Not that they're never Trumpers or whatever, but rather, I don't know them personally, says Donald Trump or someone close to Donald Trump. Here's what I'm thinking, right? The longer the shutdown goes on, the greater the financial pressure. Money isn't coming in. Your workers are drifting away. They got to find other work. You're not available to keep them employed and pay them in this time. And maybe they find work elsewhere. Maybe they don't. But at some point, it becomes really difficult for the contractors to say, yeah, I can stay in business. If most of your work is government buildings, cleaning services, let's say, and you can't replace that, then there's a pretty serious chance that with 30 plus days of no income, you might be going out of business. It's not just that your workers have to leave and try and find other work. It's that your business might go under. Does that concern Donald Trump? Well, not if, for instance, a friend of his from Mar-a-Lago says, I am a wealthy businessman. I made my money contracting for similar services, doing cleaning. We didn't have a huge amount of federal government work. We had gotten closed out of that, unfortunately. I would love to have that money because it's free money. Because, we don't do any of that work. We move some papers around and say we cleaned your place and collect the dollars. And it's the federal government and no one ever knows who's paying who. So I would love to get in on some of that. If you force the incumbent contractors out of business by drying up their revenue stream, or even if they're able to survive the loss of revenue, all of their workers drift away and work for someone else, then when the government reopens, you're in no position to fulfill the contract. And guess what? You know what? For non-performance of the contract, poof, you're fired. And we need a new contractor. And lo and behold, a friend of the Donalds from Mar-a-Lago provides the same services. And now the contract goes to that person instead. Ta-da. And if you really want to smooth that transition, suppose for 30 days or so, the government is closed. And while you're a brilliant businessman, you've been running your contract cleaning service brilliantly from day one, and you have the cash reserves to weather the storm. So hooray, build the wall, Mr. President. We're with you. I'm willing to forego the revenue from cleaning the offices, or rather from other people cleaning the offices, and me getting paid to get those people to clean the offices. I can weather the storm. However, all of my employees can't weather the storm, and they drifted away to do something else. Maybe they went to work for a rival cleaning company. Maybe, in fact, a rival cleaning company, let's say owned by a friend of Donald Trump's from Mar-a-Lago, watches the shutdown go on, realizes what's happening, may even know, let's say, have inside information about what's happening, and is out there talking to people forced to leave their current employers because they are idled during the shutdown. And you say, I know things must be tough. I can't pay you as much, but I can at least offer you a job on my staff. I can get you some hours and we'll fit you in on my existing clients elsewhere. And we'll pay you half or 3/4 of what your old employer was paying you. And I know that's not great, but it's better than nothing. And people jump at the chance to have some income of some kind, especially when they're in tough economic times with a shutdown like that. And then, poof, the government reopens, but the incumbent is now in no position to fulfill those contracts because their employees have all drifted away, and it's going to take them some time to staff up again, except that the market of people available to do the work is tighter than it used to be, because all of those workers have been snapped up elsewhere. And interestingly, they were snapped up probably for less money than you were paying them. And now, even if you wanted to get back into servicing that contract, you might now have to pay a premium because there are fewer people available for the work. And there's no indication, I guess up until Friday, there was no indication that you were ever going to get back on your feet. Now that it's all done, a lot of those people have signed on with, let's say the cleaning service owned by the friend from Mar-a-Lago, who's now paying those people less than they were getting paid before, and is able to make an even higher profit margin on the contract that the first incumbent just lost by being forced out of business by the shutdown. Wouldn't that be a great strategy? Couldn't that be done on a number of fronts? Sure, it could. Is it being done on a number of fronts? I don't know. Do you think that his friends are not sharp enough to pick up on the opportunity? I'm not asking you what you think about Donald Trump and his sharpness. I'm asking, what do you think about his friends' sharpness? Were they able to exploit that? Were they able to convince him to hold out in the shutdown? Were they able to convince him that, knowing that it would drive contractors out of business and that they'd be able to step into the void? I don't know. But be ready to read about it in the newspaper. And when you do, you'll say, oh, I heard it here first, even though I thought he was lying when he said it the first time. Okay, just wanted to put that out there. I do think that's an entirely likely possibility, and you'll be reading about it shortly enough. Okay, other things that I wanted to share with you. Back to Pocket. Let's see. Oh, and I guess maybe I should scroll through my old Twitter feed a little bit here, too, and see what else did I see over the weekend that I thought would be of interest. Oh, in fact, here's one. Twister Cat sent me something here with the KITM hashtag on it that looks like something maybe we ought to take a look at. Greg O'Lear and his tweet stream here. Who is Greg O'Lear? Well, I don't know. That's the answer. Author of Dirty Rubles, an introduction to Trump Russia. Well, that sounds pretty good. And so does the thread. Let's talk about Republicans and sexual deviance. Wow. Not deviants, the people who commit the deviance, but in fact the deviants is what we're talking about here. Here's a picture of old Donald Trump with a Miss Universe, Miss USA, whichever one, pageant winner, it looks like, because she's got a big tiara on. And familiar scene, the old lech. Let's talk about this and see what they have to say. During the 2016 campaign, Greg O'Lear writes, MAGA, Make America Great Again, you know those people, began to use the term cuck, remember that one, to attack soft liberal men. We knew the provenance. Once again, we use the word. Provenance of that one. The word is a truncation of cuckold and refers broadly to a husband who, quote, shares his wife with other more alpha men. Although I don't know that the sharing is, I guess in the fantasy side of things, is not necessarily supposed to be all that voluntary all the time. But yeah, okay, so cuck is a curious term for MAGA to use, as so many Trump associates are, by definition, cuckolds. Roger Stone and Paul Manafort are rumored to be swingers. Of course, then that would, well, it's voluntary from their perspective. I don't know how into it their wives are. It's alleged that Paul Manafort's wife was unhappy in this arrangement. There are whispers about Kushner, too. Oh, my. And if Melania was really having an affair, as alleged, then Trump is also a cuck. Now, I don't know whether any of this is actually applicable, but it's interesting. Anyway, the things that they tend to share among themselves, like Stone and Manafort, I think the reason that they've been friends and partners for so long is because they were into the same things. I don't know whether one talked the other into it or not, but I think that has something to do with it. This seems to be a case of projection, straight from the KGB playbook. Oh my, I don't know. Accuse your enemy of what you yourself are guilty of. And I don't think the KGB invented that one, but it might be in their book. The cucks here were, in actuality, the ones throwing the word at their non-MAGA adversaries. And I would distinguish, I think, between swingers, whatever you take that term to mean, and cucks as it's understood by alt-right MAGA people, for whom the other player in the game here, who's now with their wives, that the whole thing is somehow a voluntary swap, which, you know, though it's not my lifestyle, I guess if everybody consents to it, it's like, well, okay. I don't know how much objection I really have to that. And I guess they would probably say, hey, I don't like necessarily being referred to as a sexual deviant either. Although some of them probably say, I relish the term. Go ahead. The rest of you are too boring. But okay. Anyway, I think there's possibly two different varieties going on here, and many more, I'm sure, to be discovered in the wild. The MAGA obsession, though, with pedophilia is another example. Why did that wingnut go and shoot up Comet Ping Pong? Because he believed Hillary Clinton was running a pedophile sex ring in the basement. There is no Clinton pedophile sex ring. There is no basement in that pizza place. And by the way, I think somebody just started a fire there as well, though they're not sure whether that's another alt-right weirdo who believes Pizzagate or not. There are, however, Many examples of Trump associates and collaborators who have uncomfortable relationships with pedophilia. Jeffrey Epstein, him we know about. Alan Dershowitz, who denies it vehemently, but I guess so does Jeffrey Epstein. Roy Moore, whatever. Jim Jordan, true, although again, he may deny, well, pedophilia is the wrong category for what I witnessed, which is also a different posture in the equation than Jeffrey Epstein, let's say. And then, of course, Trump himself at Miss Teen USA, don't forget about them. Trump seems to have a preference for underage girls, or at least a specific interest in them, I would guess. The Trump pedophilia links don't end there. What else is there? Well, he includes here a tweet from Sarah Kendzior, who says in this tweet, Nader, not Ralph, but I guess are we talking about George, is the 5th pedophile tied to Trump. That's a lot of pedophiles to get tied to. The other men are, others are men to, I guess we would say, to whom Trump had closer ties. Roy Cohn, John Casablancas, the modeling industry impresario, Jeffrey Epstein, and Tevfik Arif, whose name we actually have called. I think he's the guy who got arrested with the yacht off of the coast of Turkey, although allegedly Turkey has decided that he has done nothing wrong there. Side note, in Greg O'Leary's tweets storm here, the longest-serving Republican Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, is a convicted pedophile. We don't talk about that nearly enough. This brings us to Trump's seemingly bizarre fascination with women with their mouths duct taped closed. Been hearing an awful lot about that. Of course, Trump uses this as a rhetorical device to rile up the same MAGA who were so offended by the phantom Pizzagate pedophilia. But there's more to it than that. It says here, I believe this is another example of Trump projecting his own sexual sins onto his opponents. While the PP tape, I love when they double up and say PP tape. I think that's very interesting. Curious. And, you know, it's all of a piece, right? P-tape, duct tape, whatever. They're just tapes. That's the point. He loves tape. While the P-tape described in the Steele dossier does not exist. What? Steele himself says so. Oh, is that right? No, I'm disappointed. I'm a firm believer that it's fun to say the P-tape is real. So, there are tapes, though, plural, of Trump participating in compromising sexual acts per the BBC. Is that right? BBC here with this report, Trump compromising claims. How and why did we get here? I better open that up just to be sure what that's about. When did that article come out? That's from January of last year. Paul Wood, BBC News. I'm curious. Does it say anything? Is it something? Well, it's claims about a Russian blackmail tape. I don't know what distinguishes that from the P tape, I guess, except that, you know, maybe there's no P in it, but I don't know if there's any better or worse without it. Okay. That the FSB, which specializes in honeypot compromat, as they say, could secure a sex tape involving the impulsively carnal Trump hardly requires suspension of disbelief. To paraphrase the third man, Trump was born to be compromised. If there are Trump sex tapes, what might they contain? I have heard from several sources, this is not good, that the acts involve underage girls and violence. And what I mean is that those two things are not good, but I don't know how good it is for anybody to say, well, you know, this nonsense I've heard from several sources. Okay, sure, you've heard from, all right, huge grain of salt there. What are the odds that the alleged violence involved duct tape and that Trump keeps bringing this up because he's done it himself? That's a maybe, although I think it might just be movies. I don't want to kink shame. Too late for Greg, he says. I don't want to kink shame. I couldn't care less what people do in the privacy of their own bedrooms or rented suites in the Ritz, Moscow. But if the person in question is the president and the act is illegal, then that is yet another reason why this monster must be removed from office immediately. Okay. Well, what do we think about that? Not too much, to be honest. I mean, it's worth bringing up because I do think that there's a lot of weird projection that goes on, and that there are an awful lot of weird relationships among Republicans and donors that they like to hang out with, that and their consultancy, which overlap in private arrangements, some of which might be okay, some of which might not be. But I do think that there's a tremendous amount of what motivates these people that's sexual in nature, and that they think they can feed their habit by signing on to the Breitbart crew, the Trump crew, the Fox News crew. I mean, I guess we should not forget that Roger Ailes turned that place into his own sexual playground, and for nothing but prurient reasons, obviously. He really thought that he could get away with anything there, and he encouraged an atmosphere where others were encouraged to think the same. And they set the tone of the country politically for 20 plus years. So I don't think it's entirely out of place to bring this stuff up. I don't know that they certainly didn't establish their claims very well. But I guess as I had just done a bit of baseless speculation previously, there was room for other people's baseless speculation as well. I get to disavow their baseless speculation. No, I'm stuck with mine. All right, let's see. There were a couple of other things, I think, that were of perhaps more substantive interest in the Twitter stream if we scroll back a little further. And there's not that much time left for it, but just wanted to see if there were a couple other things that happened over the weekend worth making mention of at this point. Oh, yeah, that's an interesting thing, too. Well, another thing to watch in the news. NBC News had a report over the weekend. Guns and God. Growing number of churches turn to armed volunteers for their security. Growing number of churches want armed security. Is the headline, actually. But I think what they were getting at was the growing number of churches where congregation members who are gun owners bring their weapons with them and, provide some sort of formal or informal security for the congregation. Sometimes it's as simple as, if you have a gun, bring it, and if a shooter were to break into the church during worship services, you would return fire, and the plan would be you would minimize casualties. I don't know if that's what actually happens, but then there's also the version of it where congregation members are, in some cases, trained security guards or professionally, who provide security, and who say, I will come to work armed, and I'll come to church armed, and I'll volunteer to stand as guard, as opposed to just simply worshiping with a gun in my pocket, which is slightly different, and perhaps would be slightly more effective if they were actually patrolling during services. So anyway, I just point this out only because I don't know if there's any discussion of this in the piece, NBC News piece by Mary Flum, P-F-L-U-M, but I just want to point out, those of you who've listened to the show for a long time know where I'm going. While there is a rising number of churches who want armed security, and a rising number of churches for whom parishioners or congregants will provide that security, there is also a rising number of gun accidents in church, and they are correlated. And the more people who bring their guns to church, the more accidents there are going to be. There have been plenty already. I haven't been tracking them like I used to in recent months, but there's no shortage of them, and the record out there speaks for itself. Similarly, every time I see, as I did this morning, someone else who accidentally shot themselves while shopping at Walmart, a reminder, scores of people have shot themselves at Walmart. Walmart actuaries almost certainly have this in mind, but haven't done the calculations yet about how much it will cost them in business versus any potential lawsuits. But if you're the largest retailer in America or the world, and you allow people to carry their guns there, and the people who carry them are stupid, that makes things worse, but that occasionally happens. Even if they're very smart, you're just going to, if you allow the guns, you're going to have gun accidents. If you don't allow the guns, you're going to have gun accidents because people will ignore your rules. But if you allow the guns, you're going to have more because people will think they're doing the right thing by bringing those guns. All right. Let's see. Other things we ought to get to. Yes. Let's see if we can fit this one in. This was very interesting and deserves further discussion, and we've discussed it in the past, so you've got a background in this. But I saw Cory Doctorow tweeting out a link to his own piece at Boing Boing and discussing this subject, saying the rent is too damn high because money laundering oligarchs bought all the real estate to clean their oil money. That's the title of the piece that he attached to his tweet. And we've been down this road, and I think it was really interesting. It says here, in an absolutely epic Twitter thread unrolled here, and I don't know if we're going to get to read both of them, but you'll see the reference. Author C.Z. Edwards lays out an incredibly compelling explanation of spiraling real estate prices. Oligarchs need to launder a lot of oil money. Think Russia, Iran, ex-Soviet basket case states, Saudi, etc. And so they plow the money into offshore real estate investment trusts that then clean it by outbidding any actual real estate investors or would-be homeowners, bidding up and snapping up all the property in desirable cities, and then realizing the rental income flows as legitimate clean money. We've talked about money laundering through buying Trump condos, which is just straight basic, I'm going to launder a lump sum by paying too much, and I don't even care about paying too much because I'm laundering money for Trump property and then having an asset that you can sell off later as clean money. But this is a more closely related to money laundering as an income stream. Buy up property at inflated prices, it's fine, and then rent the property out, and the rental money is clean. It's as neat and compelling a way of describing the link between oligarchy and spiraling real estate prices as you could ask for. Shelter is not optional, so people will spend whatever it takes to get a roof over their heads. Cities are not infinitely sprawlable, so it's possible to corner the market on places to live in them. Eventually, the parasites will devour the host and leave the cities empty shells. Ahem, Venice is what it says here. But by then, the money launderers will have sold up and moved on. And of course, since real estate is a great way to launder money, real estate developers are often mobbed up AF, which explains a lot about the president and his grifter inner circle. Edwards points out that her work on money laundering came out of her research on a novel called Ryan's Rebellion, Kingdom. Well, just in case you know it. Once upon a time, a nation's fate depended on an informant, a lawyer, and a warrior. They all lived under a good monarch's leadership until he was assassinated. I guess that's what Ryan's Rebellion, Kingdom is about. Anyway, I guess here, some clips from the tweet storm from Edwards. He picks up right here. A few overpriced, stupid apartments. Does it really matter? Not as much, no, but that's not where most of the laundering happens. It happens at the basic apartment building level because of a thing called a real estate investment trust. Let's take a California dingbat apartment building. I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but apparently means something to somebody. Usually 4 to 8 apartments, smaller places, I guess, 'cause earthquakes can be a problem. They sell for $10 to $20 million, depending, and bring in $8,000 to $16,000 a month in revenue. So let's say you've got 25 money laundering clients, all about $3 million after you and your washing cut that they need to invest. Okay, we can understand that. $75 million, all told. Let's buy 6 dingbats and put them in a real estate investment trust, which hires a management team, which collects $2,000 in rent from each apartment each month. 6 buildings, 8 apartments each, $2,000, $96,000 a month in revenue. The management company takes 20%. Your money laundering clients get $76,000 per month in clean money, and it all came from legal, legit rent investment income property. Real estate investment trusts clean the money better than a dry cleaner. I am oversimplifying, but not by much. There are some shell corporations in there, some in the Caymans or Seychelles, but also in Delaware, Wyoming, North Dakota, Nevada. What happens when there's not much real estate to put in a real estate investment trust? Well, remember, there's loss in money laundering, A real estate investment trust backed by money laundering doesn't really care if it costs $5 million or $10 million for an apartment building. In a way, the $10 million apartment building is better because it cleans more money in one go. And they can outbid someone looking to own a 6-apartment dingbat. Wish I knew what that term meant. Anyway, if the real estate investment trust buys a building for an inflated price and they're getting clean money every month, they can just sit on it until someone legit comes along, having convinced the bank to make them a very large mortgage on an inflated price. Look at the expensive cities out there. It's not an accident. The tweet thread itself is very compelling and tells a lot of that story. And I feel like we've been over that subject before, but it's a good reminder. We'll probably return to it later in the week. Now, though, time for Justice Putnam to take over with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy right here on Netroots Radio following this message. And I'll tell you a little bit about what he's going to have for you next.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, he'll be back on the subject of Jared Kushner's security clearance, which definitely deserves more attention. Also got for you one of America's worst gerrymanders suffered a potentially fatal blow. A former Surgeon General warns Trump's war on science is as egregious as he's ever seen. That and much, much more. Just do stay tuned for Justice next.